has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 290, Out of Sight. An undercover investigator's fight for animal rights and her own survival, with author Gail Eisnitz. Hi, kids. It's Michelle. You know, one of the most profound realizations I had as I was going vegan, since I've gone vegan, I've said it here on the pod many, many times, was what else am I not seeing? And that thought has made me very, very humble over the years. What else am I not seeing? Today's guest is Gail Eisnitz. Gail is the chief investigator for the Humane Farming Association, and she's the winner of the Albert Schweitzer Medal for Outstanding Achievement in Animal Welfare, and she's the author of a new book, Out of Sight, an undercover investigator's fight for animal rights and her own survival. Gail's book is a memoir and a medical mystery, and it's also about the world behind our food system. And Gail knows a lot about what it's like to spend years being told nothing's wrong when you know something is. In our conversation, there's discussion of industrial animal agriculture, factory farming, slaughterhouses, and it may not be appropriate for some listeners or in some listening contexts. We don't go into endless detail, but out of respect for the animals and the work of investigators and whistleblowers, I don't want to just ignore the facts, which are, as we all know, occurring daily around the country. And I don't want to contribute to keeping this topic out of sight. That said, this episode and Gail's book is not just, as she says, it's not just a litany of horrors. It's about what stays out of sight and why it stays there and what it looks like to choose to see anyway. Gail Eisnitz, Chief Investigator with the Humane Farming Association, author, and animal advocate, and so much more. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I've recently read your book. The fabulous Sandra Nemoto sent me your information, sent me a PDF of your book. I was just telling you before we started recording, I don't know if I've ever been so nervous to do a podcast with anybody because I'd really love to do your work justice today.
Oh, thank you. That's so funny, though. I'm so glad that you want to do it justice.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what the justice is we're going to try and achieve today, but we're going to try, because a lot of your work is about investigating animal abuse in farms. A lot of your work has come out of a lifelong interest in kindness to animals and understanding how they work. And I was also interested that you have been an artist since a young person, and that this is all very interesting because the name of your book is Out of Sight, and it's about your work, but also it's a mystery and a memoir about looking for answers about a visual processing disorder that you didn't know what it was.
That's right. Yes, I've had this visual processing disorder for as long as I can remember. and it wasn't established in the medical literature until about 10 years ago. So it wasn't possible to find out what it was. About 3 years ago, I got a diagnosis, which was life-changing. So that was great.
And your age roughly when you got this diagnosis was?
I think I was 66.
Yeah, it's a long time, right?
Yeah.
To know something's wrong.
Yeah, it was a long, hard slog.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the way you've written this memoir, well, among many interesting things, is you have a kind of parallel timeline of your visual processing disorder, of some OCD you were experiencing since a young age, and also the work you do and how those all those issues kind of braided together over a really remarkable life.
Thank you for saying that. I like that word, braided together. That's what I tried to do. Yeah, I had undiagnosed OCD as well my whole life, but it was undiagnosed until I was in my 30s because back then in the old days, I don't think anybody knew what OCD was, and I didn't know what was wrong with me until I was in my 30s. And then I had the visual processing problem, which is a neurological disorder, which is revealed at the book's climax. I had that, and that was undiagnosed for 60 something years. So it wasn't easy, but I continued. It made me relate to the animals on a very deep level. I could identify with their alienation and their helplessness, and so I went into the animal field because it's something that made sense to me to do.
And partially, you wanted to illustrate both literally illustrate animals and illustrate cognitively or intellectually what is going on in our world with animals.
Yeah, I mean, I did become an illustrator because I couldn't get a job in the animal protection field. It was a small field back then in the 1980s. And so I became an illustrator of animal endangered species. And that is an interesting story. It got me in the door because an exterminator sprayed chemicals over one of my illustrations, and I wrote about it. And the New York Times ran that story because I compared the pesticide from the exterminator to the extermination of the bald eagle from DDT, since it was an illustration of a bald eagle. And the New York Times ran that story with the picture, the ruined picture. And then I wrote several other articles for the New York Times, and that's what got me in the door to be able to work in the animal protection movement. So, yeah.
Well, you're an extraordinary writer, and obviously you've been writing for many, many years. This is certainly not new out of the box that's going on with you. The interesting thing to me is what you have been able to publish and get media to jump on, and what you haven't been able to across your professional life. So the New York Times in the 80s was happy to run those sorts of articles
Right.
about well, I think especially about wildlife being endangered, but the animals that we rely on, many people in this country rely on 2-3 times or more a day. We don't give them as much airtime.
Right. I had a great deal of trouble with working with the television networks, trying to expose the fact that animals were being skinned and boiled alive in slaughterhouses. And they went out in the field with me. They talked to the workers that I had taken affidavits from. They did all sorts of work to do these great stories on what's happening behind the closed doors of slaughterhouses and factory farms. And then at the last minute, all three networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, killed the story because they said it would be too disturbing to their audiences and they might change the channel. So that was disheartening. But I did have some success with the Washington Post and HBO, which I can talk about if you want me
Please.
to.
Yeah, please. I think that it is good to try to find the good news in all of this.
Yeah, the Washington Post, I had written my first book called Slaughterhouse, documenting violations of federal laws in USDA inspected packing plants. And I was working on a big slaughterhouse case in Washington State, and I urged, begged, implored a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter at the Post to do a story on my findings. And ultimately, after input from one of his friends who I knew, he agreed to do the story, and it was on the front page of the Post. And that was extremely successful. It ran 3 pictures of a cow hanging from the bleed rail, blinking. And it was extremely successful because the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act had been on the books for 43 years, but it had been zero budgeted, meaning it had never had a penny put towards its enforcement. So what good is a law being on the books if you can't enforce it? So that story being on the front page of the Post outraged Congress. Just Congress was beside itself. And speeches were made on the floor of the Senate, and it was a big deal, and money was put toward enforcing the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, several $1 million. But that doesn't go that far in the right direction. And HBO was extremely willing to expose our findings, unlike ABC, NBC, and CBS. We did an investigation at a hog factory. We, being Humane Farming Association, did an investigation at a hog factory in Ohio where old sows breeding mother pigs, that are kept in gestation crates for their entire lives, and farrowing crates, which are basically the same thing, that's 400 to 600 pound animals in crates that are 2 feet wide by 7 feet long. And in certain instances, we found them even smaller than that. One place they were only 19 inches wide. And they go crazy and they start engaging in what are called stereotypic behaviors and bobbing their heads and biting the bars and chewing the air. And they generally collapse from arthritis and things like that because they're standing on concrete above the waste pit their entire lives. Anyway, at this particular farm, the old sows that couldn't stand anymore were being kicked and dragged and electrically prodded out down the barn alleyway and out, dropped off a 4-foot ledge onto the freezing cold earth on piles of other sows that could no longer stand. And then a worker put a chain around the sow's neck and fastened the other end of the chain to the tines of a forklift. And then they lifted the forklift, and the sow would struggle in circles, kicking and thrashing for about 5 minutes until they finally suffocated under their own weight. And we got that on videotape. And HBO, as courageous as it was, aired that videotape in a documentary called Death on a Factory Farm. So that aired 19 times the first month, and then it continued to air, and it's still available online. But that was a beautiful success because it gave people a window into what was going on behind the closed doors of factory farms. So we did have success with the Washington Post and HBO, and the New York Times ran some stories for us and other Washington Post stories. But those are the 2 biggies.
So your second book is called Out of Sight, and please remind me what the subtitle is of it because I don't want to get it wrong. I'm going to say it wrong. It's Out of Sight.
Out of Sight: An Undercover Investigator's Fight for Animal Rights and Her Own Survival.
Yeah, because this is a as I say, braided. It's a braided narrative. It's a memoir. There's a lot going on in there, and I'm so taken by the title Out of Sight because it really works on so many levels of your physical experience, having pixelated vision your whole life and seeing things differently physically, neurologically, also seeing what most of us don't want to look at in the way animals come through our food system. And also, what really fascinated me is out of sight, the words we use to describe what's going on, these euphemisms. And one of the euphemisms I read in your book was depopulation, right?
Right. Yes. I can tell you about depopulation in a little bit of detail because it's so critical to what's going on right in the here and now. Depopulation is a term that the ag industry has coined for, I'll give you a definition, the large scale on farm mass killing of animals who, due to disease or other unforeseen circumstances, such as natural or man made disasters, can't be shipped to slaughter. And the American Veterinary Medical Association, which is deeply in bed with the meat industry, defines it as the rapid destruction of a population of animals in response to urgent circumstances, with as much consideration given to the welfare of the animals as practicable. And those last two words kind of nullify the whole meaning of the definition as practicable.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. But anyway, the most common form of depopulation of poultry because of the avian influenza outbreak, in which 200 million poultry have been killed since 2022, is called ventilation shutdown plus. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The producers simply seal up barn inlets, shut off ventilation system fans, heat the barn to triple digits, and or add steam to heat it up more. And it's as cruel as it sounds. The animals just simply bake to death. And that's been used, that's how the majority of the 200 million poultry killed to stop the spread of avian influenza have been killed. And also, during the COVID outbreak, when meatpacking plants were shuttered because workers were sick, 1 million pigs were killed using ventilation shutdown plus. So it's really unconscionable. You could never get away with doing that to a companion animal. I mean, bake it to death. I mean, if you leave a dog in a hot car, you can get arrested. I mean, but 200 million poultry and 1 million pigs have been killed using ventilation shutdown plus. And another form of depopulation is called water-based foam, which is basically firefighting foam. It's sprayed into barns up and over the chickens and the pigs to drown them or to suffocate them. And that's a standard practice to kill animals on farm when outbreaks occur, which is pretty concerning because African swine fever has hit the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and that's pretty close to the United States. And should it reach the United States, and somebody comes into this country with a ham sandwich that's infected and infects our pigs, there goes the whole pork industry. And there goes over 100 million pigs that would be killed by probably water-based foam or carbon dioxide.
So whether we actually, I mean, we don't want those germs, those viruses, and those bacteria to spread. That's one. I mean, I'm sure that's the explanation for this. It has to be shut down somewhere. But we have a food industry that creates more of it because of the close quarters these animals are raised in. So we're almost looking for trouble.
Right. Yeah. There's such disease-promoting hostile conditions that the animals are raised in. It's natural that these diseases break out in these conditions.
Yeah. So this is this is I'm gonna do my shadow laugh, the laugh I do when it's just so dark. There is a lot to know, and there's a lot that your book unpacks, along with your personal discovery of what's going on neurologically for you, and all your feelings about it. And you had many dark nights of the soul, it sounds like, wondering what you were doing to maybe bring some of this on yourself.
Yeah, that is one of the themes in the book, and it was one of the major themes in my life because I went to so many doctors and they all basically told me to get lost. There's nothing wrong with me. Ophthalmologists, neurologists, neuro-ophthalmologists. Um, I basically turned it on myself and thought maybe I'm imagining this, maybe I'm doing it to myself. I knew I wasn't because it's so real. It's caused by certain weather conditions and things like that. I knew I wasn't causing it, but some part of me kept saying, I had a mantra in my head, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you doing this to yourself? And I lived in that space for 60 years. And that's why it was such an incredible relief and life-changing to get a diagnosis.
And so an example of that diagnosis was Out of Sight. I'm going to hit the title of your book 100 times today. Out of Sight. There is a relief, and there is some sort of intellectual and emotional satisfaction, I think, when we know what's going on rather than when we don't.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because then you don't have to think you're the source of the problem anymore.
Yeah. So, along with this long journey, for want of a better word, of trying to figure out what's going on with you, trying to figure out how your work, your career can coexist with some of the debilitating symptoms that you were experiencing, you talk about, is it Tim Walker who begins your
Yes,
book?
yes.
A really interesting kind of a hero personality that you open your book largely with. Can you tell me a little bit of something about Tim Walker?
Wow, he was such a hero. He worked for the USDA, which is supposed to enforce the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. He wasn't a meat inspector. They're the ones that are supposed to enforce it. He was a brucellosis tester looking for signs of disease in cows that had been slaughtered. And so he was on a rail above the slaughtered cows taking blood samples. But what he encountered was the fact that the cows were hanging there, struggling, kicking, their eyes rolling, mooing, bellowing. Um, and he reported that to all of his supervisors. He reported it to the Veterans Administration and his congressman. He reported it to everybody he could think of because it was against the law. It's against the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. You can't skin cows' heads while they're still fully conscious, which is what was going on. And then he wrote to a bunch of animal groups, and my response was the only one he received. So I went down to Florida. It was the largest slaughterhouse in the southeastern United States, and I documented the fact that what he was saying was true. I corroborated it with other USDA personnel and with workers at the plant. And one of his USDA co-workers ratted him out, and he was fired. So we engaged in long litigation under the Federal Whistleblower Protection Act to protect him and get him his job back. But in the process of that litigation, the USDA had to conduct an investigation into the plant, and it did. And it was the biggest plant in the Southeast with plans to expand. And don't you know, as soon as the investigation was conducted, the plant shut down and went out of business. But right after that, the Secretary of Agriculture released his report of the findings of the USDA's inspection. And he said it was a model plant. It was a perfect plant. He issued a glowing report. It was the biggest cover up you could imagine. There's just so much corruption going on. So, anyway, Timothy Walker, he was a great man. All he wanted to do was protect the animals and his fellow workers who were in danger by these kicking cows who were thrashing as they were having their heads skinned while they were conscious.
Well, that's a very important point, is that even if you can just philosophically close your thoughts to the idea of what the animals are experiencing, it is exceptionally dangerous for the human beings who are close to these animals while they are suffering. And with you discuss how legislation is allowing even more processing of a more rapid processing of animals or slaughter of animals, which is even more dangerous for the workers.
Right. Yeah. The USDA is changing its line speed requirements for pork and poultry. You have just a few plants in this country killing large numbers of animals, so line speeds are terrifically fast. I mean, you have thousands of the nation's small to mid-sized plants forced out of business by this handful of these large high-speed operations that have the capacity to each kill more than 1 million animals a year. So you have fewer slaughterhouses killing a growing number of animals, and so line speeds have skyrocketed. So one plant I visited today kills 35,000 hogs a day. And I always make the comparison, you couldn't disassemble 35,000 toasters a day, no less kill 35,000 live, kicking, squealing animals. But the bottom line is, until now, the line speed has been 1,106 hogs killed per line per hour, or one hog every 3 seconds. And that wasn't fast enough for the meat industry. So the last few administrations have been fighting to lift that line speed. They're not even increasing it. They're just lifting it to whatever speed you want to go at. And poultry, who are not covered, they're exempt under the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. So you can do anything to poultry. But those birds were being killed at 140 birds per minute. And now it's being increased to 175 birds per minute in a given plant. That's 3 birds per second. So line speeds are out of control, and they definitely put workers at risk.
Yeah, I'm just going to let that sit for a second, just for anyone to try to imagine that rapidity of motion and movement and the experience that must be going on in a situation like that. It's really hard to believe. Now, with your position as chief investigator with the Humane Farming Association, you before that were with another organization, right, where you had maybe less support in the work that you're doing.
That's a great way to put it, Michelle. I worked for the Humane Society of the U.S. for several years, and I got a new boss there when I was working there who had some kind of problem, an ego problem, you might say. And I'm not just, somebody that's saying, oh, I had a bad boss and complaining about him. This boss would not let me expose my slaughterhouse findings to the point where hogs were being immersed in the scalding tank fully conscious and cows were being skinned alive, and he would not let me do anything, to the point where I ended up saying, I'm so stressed out, I'm going to get breast cancer. And 6 months later, I had it. I mean, he was a bad boss. He would not, I'm not blaming him for the breast cancer. I'm just saying what stress can do to people is pretty remarkable. But anyway, he was a bad boss, and he would not let me expose my findings. And so all I'll say is that he is now serving a life sentence in federal prison for something that he did that was bad.
Okay. So it tracks then. His behavior tracks.
Yes.
And so there you are trying to uncover information, collect information, document information that could be used to make things either better or to stop things from happening. And he asked you to just sit on those findings.
Yes, I think he had an ego problem. He wanted to be the source of the information, and if he wasn't, then it wasn't going to get out. And it was deeply troubling to sleep at night and know that these violations were occurring and not be able to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you at that time moved into your position at the Humane Farming Association?
Yes, I finally, even though the Humane Society of the U.S. had been my dream job, I was out of there because I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So I hired on with Humane Farming Association, which is an amazing organization, and they they gave me the means to do whatever I needed to do regarding slaughter-bound animals, and then I went into factory farm animals and have done all sorts of interesting cases since then. And the book follows those cases, which opens up another door that I think is worth mentioning. 55 years ago, we used to slaughter 10 billion animals per year in the world. And today we slaughter 10 billion animals per year in the United States alone. So that's really a scary statistic.
Mm-hmm. And it's a statistic where what's going on is out of sight. I'm going to go back to the title of your book, Out of Sight. We don't really see what that entails, do we?
No, I mean, the media works hard to keep it under wraps, and prosecutors are not willing to prosecute when we come up with violations. It's been very, as I said, disheartening to see the way nobody wants to expose this information.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the prosecutors worked really hard to not prosecute when we had open and shut cases, except one prosecutor who stepped up to the plate and actually did prosecute a big case at the end of the book, which was very encouraging.
Because there's no federal statute, correct, about how the animals are treated.
Yes, that's correct.
So
There's
these,
no federal.
so then you have 50 state or more local
Yes,
statutes.
state anti-cruelty laws, which are hard to enforce because nobody's in the slaughter. Well, there's a federal Humane Methods of Slaughter Act for slaughter animals, but on factory farms, there's no federal law, and state animal cruelty statutes are hard to enforce because there's no one in the factory farms to see what's going on. And then when you do get documentation working with employees who videotape it and give, in one case we had 800 pages of worker testimony that we gave to the South Dakota Attorney General, and he just dismissed, he gave a few weeks advance notice before going to the farm, and they hauled off all the dead and dying animals and cleaned it up real pretty. And then he went in there and said it was a model farm.
Yeah. Well, it probably is. It probably is a model of what's going on in most of them.
Yeah, right.
Gail, what can consumers do? I know that the famous Margaret Mead quote that, you know, never underestimate what concerned citizens can change, because ultimately it's concerned citizens that have changed everything that has changed. I know this is an enormous scale, far bigger than what one person does in a day or a year or a lifetime in your case. But what do you think people can do?
Well, I mean, you're a big part of the solution. People changing their eating habits is a big part of the solution, voting with their consumer dollars. I also encourage them to get the book and share it, not because I want book sales, but because the information in there is so important and people don't know most of this information. So I encourage them to get the book from their library, ask their library to stock the book, buy the book, share it with friends, family, and also join the Humane Farming Association. That's a good thing. That's hfa.org. If I might, I could say a little bit about the Humane Farming
Please,
Association.
please.
Okay, sure. Well, it's got 300,000 members, and it conducts anti-cruelty investigations like the ones that I do. We have national media campaigns like the National Veal Boycott, in which we ran advertisements in national newspapers and magazines and exposed the fact that calves were kept in crates their entire lives and never allowed to turn around. And that campaign has been highly successful. We've seen an 89% drop in veal production since we started that campaign. So an 89% drop, that's just fantastic. We engage in legislation. In fact, we were responsible for the first congressional and state hearings on farm animal legislation. And we do a lot of litigation. We just had a case resolved yesterday where a big poultry corporation allowed 2 million birds to starve because it tried to declare bankruptcy. And we were able to get it convicted. I don't know if convicted is the right word in this case, but it was a civil charges where they were charged with animal mistreatment, and we won. So that was great. We have a lot of litigation going on, but I think the best thing about Humane Farming Association is the fact that we run a 7,000-acre refuge, farm animal refuge. It's the largest farm animal sanctuary in the country. We have about 1,000 animals right now, but these are all animals that were seized as a result of cruelty cases. And it's like emus and chickens and pigs and goats and burros and cattle and a little bit of everything. And they are living their best lives because it's a beautiful place where they get incredible care. And that's a really uplifting part of our work.
Well, that is uplifting to and at the same time, you must look at each one of those animals living its best life and think of, the million X others who
Absolutely.
I this is such a tough conversation for all of us to have because we are really conditioned not to think about where meat comes from, where the dairy comes from, where the animals are coming from. And we've been conditioned for many, many centuries. But what is different now is this behemoth of an organization which seems almost immune to law or morality or any kind of oversight in terms of worker or animal compassion.
Yeah, it's true. There are so many standard agricultural practices that are considered acceptable, and you would never in a million years do them to your dog or cat. I mean, I could regale you with atrocities, but I won't unless you want me to.
No, I think the atrocities unfortunately shut even people who are very aware of them, it shuts us down a little bit. And I think what we really want to keep thinking about is what's going wrong here. Ultimately, it's money, right? People want to pay less for animal products, and people want to make more money from producing them, I'm assuming.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the industry lobby is so powerful. It's so powerful. I don't know how to make it any more clear how much power it has. It's trying to turn back the clock on a lot of things, and it's really doing a lot of damage. But I mean, what happens to chickens and laying hens and dairy cows and beef cattle and hogs? People would never believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we go to Humane Farming Association.org, HFA.org, and we get on their mailing list and we try to learn a little bit. Is there a grassroots way of, or a positive grassroots way of lobbying as individuals, our Congress people and our senators?
Yes, it's always good to contact members of Congress. We have something that we're working on right now that people could contact their members of Congress about. It's called the Livestock Indemnity Program. I don't know if we have time to talk about that.
Please, I'd love that. I'm looking for some bright some bright side of this for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, people don't know it, but farmers and ranchers are reimbursed for animals that die in inclement weather, 75% of their market value. And we don't think that the government should be spending our tax dollars because farmers didn't provide shade and shelter or something to their animals. I mean, it's really hideous that animals can suffocate in the snow by the tens of thousands, and then the producers get reimbursed. So we did something that was fairly reasonable, extremely reasonable, actually. We're just asking that the producers are required to develop and implement disaster preparedness plans before they ever receive a dime of reimbursement from the USDA, because the USDA has paid out more than $500 million of our tax dollars for hundreds of millions of dead livestock and poultry since 2008. That's a lot of our money, and it's just ridiculous that producers don't have to do anything to ensure that the animals are protected from inclement weather. So they have no incentive to provide shade or shelter or anything for their animals. They just get reimbursed for their dead animals. So we got legislation introduced in Congress in the last session that required the development and implementation of disaster preparedness plans, and we're working right now to get it reintroduced in this Congress. So people can write to their House members, their Congress members, and ask them to support any legislation that would require disaster plans be in place before producers receive any reimbursement under the Livestock Indemnity Program.
Livestock Indemnity Program. So we're looking for some changes in the automatic payout to farmers rather than to make them have some skin in the game with that in terms of sheltering and protecting their animals. Okay.
Absolutely. Right.
All right. Well, we have a lot to do. And I think, if we are reading the newspaper at all, there is a lot on our plate as consumers and as citizens right now. There's a lot going on. Why do you think, Gail, that we should prioritize this issue a little bit more?
Well, that's a great question, but I think that suffering is suffering, whether it's starving children in one part of the world or animals that are being beaten to death and piglets being beaten to death in factory farms. It's suffering is suffering. I think and the scale of it is so enormous. 82 billion animals a year, land animals a year being killed in the world. I mean, it can't continue, and we can't continue to increase line speeds and make things faster. And it just deserves to be a priority.
I think so too. And obviously, it's one of the several reasons I have this podcast, and it's been going out every week, is to try to encourage conversation and to encourage even doing not enough. We can't let perfection be the enemy of making some changes, making some requests, looking a little bit, looking for where we can be part of the solution, even if we can't be the solution. Gail Eisnitz, I'm going to refer everyone to your website, gaileisnitz.com. I'm going to refer them to hfa.org, where you're chief investigator of the Humane Farming Association. And most of all, I'm going to encourage everyone to look at your book, find it, share it, take it out at the library. And that's called Out of Sight, because we don't want these issues. And also, we don't want people to give up when they've got a lifetime challenge, as you have had. We don't want them to give up looking. Keep looking.
Right. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been wonderful talking to you.
It's really a pleasure, really an honor. Thank you for your great work, Gail.
Thank you.
So, what did you think of Gail Eisnitz? You know, I can't even tell you how nervous I was preparing for this interview because I deeply wanted to help you all stick through those tough parts and to do Gail's work justice when I know how much easier it is to just shut down. And for you listening, if you listened all the way through, thank you. And if you've ever had that feeling of, I can't take one more hard truth, I get it. But here, I think, is the invitation of Gail's title, Out of Sight. Out of sight. It's not just about factory farms and slaughterhouses. It's about anything that's been hiding in plain sight until you're willing to see it. If you want to go deeper, find Gail's book, Out of Sight. And, you know, before her death, none other than the most luminous of individuals, Jane Goodall, wrote in praise of Gail's book. And I'm going to read it here because, gosh, why not? Why not? Jane Goodall wrote, "For years, Eisnitz has been a courageous and eloquent champion for the millions of suffering animals in factory farms who cannot speak for themselves. In this new book, she shares the information she's gathered and combines it with her own personal and deeply moving memoir. Shocking, heartbreaking, and full of compassion, this will reach into your heart, make you think about what you eat, and inspire you to do your bit to make this a more caring world." So I can't do any better than that. Amazing. Amazing, Gail Eisnitz. Congratulations on having such a beautiful blurb from Jane Goodall. So if you would like to support the work behind this episode, please check out the Humane Farming Association. And in the meantime, keep your eyes open and let me know all the ways that you found to veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.